This is Albert William Vrooman of Albany, New York, who served in the United States Air Force from May 1951 to June 1971. The interview is taking place in his home in Albany on June 16, 2003 at 3 p.m. The interview is being conducted by June and Kenneth Hunter. Please tell us your full name and when and where you were born.
I'm Albert William Vrooman. I was born in Schenectady, New York on Albany Street on 4th of May, 1931, which seems like a long time ago.
What did you do before you entered the service?
Well, I went to Draper High School in Rotterdam, which really doesn't exist anymore. And in between there, I did some construction work. I worked in New York City as an office boy for Katz Advertising Agency. And then I migrated myself back home and went into the United States Air Force.
Where did you go for basic training when you went into the Air Force?
A place that does not exist anymore. Sampson Air Force Base, Geneva, New York, on Lake Geneva. It's an old Navy base, was converted to an Air Force base, and we did our marching through the snow. Not like they do in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas.
How long was your basic training?
Basic training back then was about 10 weeks in the Air Force. Now I don't know what it is, but it was about 10 weeks.
Can you tell me some highlights of the basic training? It's a little bit different in all the services, and maybe our listeners and viewers in the future would like to know what the difference was in the basic training between the various services.
Yeah, well, for me it was a lot of physical training, a lot of marching, and then we had of course, we had our mock combat thing. I don't even think they do that anymore, because we had to go through tear gas and boom banging and all kind of stuff, and I don't think they do that anymore. But the thing I remember most is marching through. I've just never marched through snow. Had these big old rubber boots on and marching through the snow and doing calisthenics in the snow, and that's not something I particularly enjoyed. I don't think anybody would.
Why did you enlist in the Air Force as opposed to another branch of the service?
I liked flying. I was always involved as a kid with airplanes, models, and my dad was a Boy Scout leader, but he also formed a club called Boys of the Air, and we got involved with flying in that too. So it just seemed like second nature. Well, I'm going into the Air Force.
So then you ended up walking through snow. When did you finally get in? What sort of work did you do after basic?
When I went into basic training, they didn't have any schools open immediately. So they said, okay, we're going to make you a drill instructor. So I became a drill instructor for a few months while I was waiting for schools to open. And eventually, of all the marching, I decided I had to do more by being a drill instructor. But eventually a supply school opened, and I went to supply school at Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. And as soon as I completed that, then I was off on my way to Korea.
And then what was that like when you went to Korea? What was it like when you landed there, and what did you do there?
Well, the only sad part was I was in the Air Force and I never flew. I had to go by ship. We went to Tokyo, but the only thing is I found out I was in the right place, because I never would have made it in the Navy, because I leaned over the rail all the way to Tokyo. And then when we finally got to Tokyo, they flew me to Korea. I guess they were in a hurry to get me to Korea, but I never flew until that time, as far as the Air Force was. And then I landed it in Korea at a place called Osan, which is K-55, which is not too far, I think it's, if I remember my directions, a little bit north of Seoul or Yeongdeungpo in Korea. And I was assigned to the supply depot there, which was, my main mission was taking care of shot up vehicles. And we would take them to the Army. If they looked like they were repairable, we used to drive them to Yeongdeungpo, which is just outside of Seoul, Korea. And we would drop them off there to have them repaired. And then we would drive back to Osan with another vehicle. It was like a shuttle service.
What was the country like to you? Was it quite an awakening to see how the people were, what the climate was like, what the countryside was like?
It was pretty countryside, but the only way I can describe it is it was odoriferous with all the rice paddies. It was rather rank on occasion, especially on a hot day. That's the one thing I do remember is you get this wafting across your nose, and oh boy, those rice paddies could be ripe sometimes, and that stuck in my mind. But one thing I found surprisingly over in Korea, the trains, of course, when they would come, there were all people hanging on the sides, on the roofs and everything. But at night, they don't have headlights on the trains. And we had got a lot of our GIs got wiped out because they crossed the tracks and get hit by trains. So they passed the regulation while we were there. We had to come up to a track, stop. You always had a partner with you. You never drove alone. And he had to disembark, walk out to the tracks and look both ways and wave you across because people were getting killed. It just surprised me that I have a train come with no lights on it. That really stuck in my mind.
Do they have to blow a whistle at crossings or anything?
They didn't do that either, as far as I know. I don't remember ever hearing a whistle. They might have, but I don't remember it.
And then, how long were you stationed in Korea?
I was there from 1952 to 1953.
Oh, about a year.
And then they decided to send me back to the States for a while. I came in at Seattle, but again, I came back by ship. I couldn't get away from these ships for some reason. But that was the end of it. After that, I started to play the Air Force game, and I started to fly. I liked flying. And oddly enough, my son is a Marine. He thrives on the ships, you know, but he can't stand flying.
Oh. Now,
So-
did you have to do any sort of work on the ship?
Yes, KP.
They took advantage of you because you're not Navy.
That was it. Yeah, we did a lot of dishes and cleaning. I got the garbage rack. Took care of all the garbage and cleaning up. And, you know, the one thing I recollect I thought was rather humorous. Everybody on board ship basically was an Army. We had a small contingent of Air Force, and we did the KP. But, and of course, we got razzed, you know, needled, you know how the military, you Air Force guys got to do this and do that. But we got our comeuppance, because when we landed at Seattle, we were the last one to disembark from the ship. But when we disembarked from the ship, we come down the gangway, and there was the Army all lined up waiting for a train to back in to take them wherever they were going. And I got down the end of the gangplank, and the Air Force was sitting there, paid me, and said, "We'll see you around at your next air base." And I walked down the way, and I just laughed at everybody on my way out.
Now, you had also indicated that you served in Vietnam.
Well, between 52 and 53, when I went, I spent some time in the States. Then I went to England. And I spent 3 years in England. That's where my first daughter was born, was in England in 1960. And she had a dual citizenship. Okay, she had a dual citizenship. I didn't know that they did that, but until she was 21, she was an English subject. until, you know, and an American civic as well. After 21, she didn't declare becoming a UK citizen, and then she lost her citizenship as a British subject. But I spent 60 to 1963 in the UK, United Kingdom, whatever you want to call it. And then I came back to the States in 1963, and I went to Griffiths Air Force Base, which doesn't exist anymore. I was in the Strategic Air Command in a B-52 bomber outfit. And, well, it wasn't my cup of tea. So I volunteered to become a recruiter. So I became an Air Force recruiter, and I wound up at Lackland Air Force Base for schooling. Then I came back to Gloversville, New York, and became a recruiter. And then that was the peak of the starting of the Vietnam crisis. And of course we were doing a lot of recruiting then, and we were getting some flack, and you know, we had our good times and our bad times. But around 1967, I volunteered for Vietnam. But of all things, I wound up in Bangkok, in Thailand, and I became a courier. And that's how I got my service in Vietnam. I flew in and out of Vietnam as a courier to Da Nang Air Force Base and Saigon and back and forth. Not too often, but often enough so that I was considered a Vietnam vet of sorts.
Now, before we move ahead on this, what were the duties of a courier? That would seem strange to some person who wasn't familiar with the military.
Well, I was a non-commissioned officer, and I was in a place called Joint United States Military Assistance Group, JUSMAG, which was a compound in Bangkok of all services that were serving in the Saigon or Vietnam war campaign. And my main mission was to meet all aircraft and secure all the documents and bring them to my office where they were secured in a safe. In fact, when Richard Nixon made his tour of Southeast Asia, I had to meet his plane and secure his documents in our safe. I didn't get to meet the gentleman, but I did handle his paperwork.
When he came over, was there any unusual security that you can recall?
Not unusual, just normal procedure. You know, I had the right pass, and they knew I was coming, and so I didn't have any trouble. I just went up to the aircraft, got the valise, and away I went with my vehicle and headed to the compound, and that everything was secured until he got ready to go back, and then I had to meet the plane again and give him his documents back. But other than that, why, it was nothing specific that I can think of offhand.
So you didn't feel that you were never under fire or danger like that time?
Only when I was in Korea, really. When I was in Korea, we had to pull guard duty, and we would get, I don't know what they called him in the movie called MASH, the
mobile
TV
hospital?
series. We had a guy called Bed Check Charlie. He flew this old biplane, and he would come flying over and drop hand grenades down. We sat out there and watched him because it was such a slow jalopy, you know. We could see him up there, you know, and he would come over, and that was that, and pulling guard duty, because you did have insurgents sneak in onto the base on occasion. And one of the standing orders was the officer of the day said, when I come around on guard duty, I don't want to see you. So you hide yourself. I don't want to see anybody. So he came around one night, and he kept asking for the password or hollering where I was, and I said, give me the password. And so I finally, he wouldn't answer me, so I put a round in the chamber, and I got an answer real quick. And then He gave me the password. He came over. He said, well, you secure yourself real good. There's only one problem. I said, what's that? He said, you're among the oil drums. I said, oh, I didn't realize it. So it wasn't exactly the best place to be.
And so then, what was your next assignment if you were in the service for 20 years?
Oh, yes.
And why did you decide to make it a career?
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed traveling. I enjoyed the camaraderie and in basic, the organization, the way everything was set up in the military. I enjoyed it. And in fact, it's helped me in my own organization, you know, my own way. I'm very organized, drives my wife nuts sometimes the way I'm still military as far as the way I do things. But, and of course, my two boys being in the military, so we get along fine. And it drives my wife nuts sometimes because we talk, you know, 1,400 hours, which is 2 o'clock, 1,500 hours, and my wife can't get this straight. I said, look, there's 24 hours in the day, and we just use all 24 hours. She still doesn't have that correct. So
did you meet your wife in the military, or?
No, I met her after I had retired. In fact, I worked right across the way here at Sears. That was one thing I have to say about the military. Back then anyway, when I got out in '71, jobs, I had no trouble at all. I had all kind of references because as a recruiter, I dealt with all the schools in the area. And so I had all the guidance counselors give me recommendations because I worked with them. So I had all their recommendations and my military recommendations and all that stuff. And I just walked into Sears and I started working and receiving at Sears over here. The distribution center is what it was called then. Now it's the service center. And my wife is an import from New Jersey. And she came up here to go to work, and that's where I met her. Mm-hmm. And one thing led to another, and here we are.
Yeah.
Backtracking a little bit, you said you had served in England. Did you have any kind of duty that required you to assist in the Berlin Airlift? They were bringing a lot of supplies at that time when the Cold War was on.
No, I didn't get involved in that, but I did get involved with, I was at a place called RAF Station Wethersfield, and there was a few other stations around there, and these stations were used during the World War II. The 8th Air Force B-17 outfits were there, and I got to meet some of the local people that were there during that time, and saw some. In fact, there's still some of the skeletons of the aircraft that didn't make it, you know, coming back, and I got involved in that. But as far as the Berlin Airlift, I was in a fighter outfit, so I didn't get into any of the cargo. I was in we had T-33 fighters, F-100s, and that type of thing. So they did a lot of flying around in the area, but it was all support. And as far as cargo and anything like that, we never got into the Berlin. They may have, as far as guiding some of the cargo aircraft in and out, but if they did, I didn't know it. But one thing just came to my mind. One of the officers in charge there, I don't know if you remember, Doc Blanchard of West Point football fame.
Player.
He was one of the officers in charge there I worked with, was Doc Blanchard. And he didn't fly an F-100, he wore it. He was a big man. And when he got in that airplane, he just, to me, he wore it. So that's one thing I don't know if you remember, Mr. Inside and Outside of the West Point football fame, Doc Blanchard. And Glenn Davis was his partner. So that's a little football history. That, of course, I'm a football fan too, Dallas Cowboy fan, which is strange in this area because all my family, the rest of my family are all Giant fans. I'm a Giant fan if they're not playing Dallas. But if they're playing Dallas, I have to go along with Dallas because when I was in Wyoming, a friend of mine that I met there, his brother, was a coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and that's how I got involved, liking the Dallas Cowboys, because on occasion we would get a chance to go down there and see a game for free, you know, so I got to being a Dallas fan right off the bat.
Now, while you were in the service there, your duties over in Thailand and Vietnam, there must have been some unusual experiences that you had, good and bad. Can you tell us some of those?
Well, when I was in Thailand, the thing I found interesting is I went on the Death Railway, which is, I'm trying to think of the name of it. Anyway, it like the bridge on the River Kwai. It went right on up to the Three Pagodas Pass, and on the route was all cemeteries, which were formerly the camps that the prisoners were kept in. And when I stopped at one of the cemeteries there, they have, some of them are quite extensive. There was a memorial there, and there was a gentleman with his wife. He only had one arm, and I could tell he was Australian. And I have a big mouth. I don't mind going over and talk to people, you know, and say hello. So I went over and I started conversing with him. We got along quite well. And there was a big monument down at the end of the one cemetery. And he said, "You see that down there, mate?" He said, "If you see an arm down there, that's where the Nips lopped it off." So there's a little World War II history from it. But I did say to him, I said, "Did you see the bridge on the River Kwai, the movie?" He said, "Oh yes, mate, I saw that." I said, "Well, what do you think about that oven that they put the guys in and stuff?" He said, "A bunch of baloney. He said, nobody come out of there straight." So there's straight from the horse's mouth. That gentleman had been in that prison camp, so that I found very, very interesting. And the Death Railway itself was quite a ride. I had some movies of it, but they were stolen. I don't know why anybody would want them. They didn't mean anything to them, but they did to me. And we were in one of the, it's quite hot over there in Thailand. It's jungle. And we were wandering, we took a dip in the creek. And we asked the guide, who spoke fairly good English, any alligators or anything there? He says, "Oh, no, just crocodiles." I said, "Oh, great. Just crocodiles," he said. And then we went up to the Laotian border. And this was toward winter. And it was about 60, 65 early morning. Felt great. Short sleeves, for the first time. Really was nice. It was comfortable. It wasn't hot, sweaty. And all the Thai people had bonfires going with blankets around them, standing around. And here we are saying how nice it is. And these people are freezing to death at 60, 65. So that I found very, very interesting. Yeah, definitely different.
And now, you'd mentioned something about the rice paddies. You'd fallen in one someplace?
Well, to go back a way, when I went by ship to Japan, I got to make friends with the air police. They don't call them air police now. I guess they're called security force or whatever. And we became good friends. And then some of these guys got stationed with me at K-55 in Osan. And we were out, I forget doing what, some kind of guard duty. And all the air police there used dogs to go out cover the perimeter of the base, to keep insurgents from coming in. And rice paddies have a tiny little path that you walk on, or chogi as they call it when you're in Korea. But they're very slippery, and that's how I wound up falling in a disgusting rice paddy. But at the same time, one of the air policemen had heard this ruckus and let the dog loose. He thought it was an insurgent. And the next thing I knew, I had one of these dogs breathing on my neck. And then I heard a voice say, don't move and you'll be all right. And I said, yeah, fine. And then I heard a lot of laughing. They had realized they knew me. They knew who I was. And they were holding me in that silly rice paddy because they knew they hadn't released the dog yet. Then they finally released the dog and leashed him. And they let me up, and they thought that was all very funny, these guys. And I didn't think it was very funny. I couldn't wait to get back and have a shower.
Was the water cold in the rice paddy?
No, actually, it was in the summertime, so they were rather ripe. It's the only way I can describe it is ripe.
So, did you ever receive any commendations for your service?
Well, when I was in Thailand, as I say, I was assigned to JustMag, which is a joint military operation. And I received the Joint United States Military something or other. I don't remember all these things, but it was a commendation medal, and I received an Air Force commendation medal, and a few other things, but I don't keep track of them.
Mm-hmm. And did you make friends with people? Are you still in touch with anyone you served with?
Actually, no, and I wish I were able to. I don't. That's the only problem with being in the military. Everybody goes their own way, and almost all the people you meet are never from your own home or your own backyard. I met guys from down south and almost all over to the United States. And for a while you kept in touch, but they kept shipping you here and shipping you there, and they'd get shipped somewhere, and you lose track of each other. And as much as I would like to, I think very often of some of the fellows I was stationed with. And yes, I would love very much to bump into them and say hello. I think it would be great, but I don't know, it's virtually impossible because as time goes by, you forget names, you forget places, and you forget some of the things you've done and who they were, and unfortunately, you stick with what you're doing in your own backyard.
Mm-hmm. So you don't know as any of your units have had reunion events? Or?
I recently received my VFW magazine, and there was a reunion at Sampson Air Force Base. I haven't followed through on it. I don't know if it would be worthwhile because I don't remember anybody from Sampson Air Force Base. I was a recruit, so I didn't make much in the way of buddies. When I became a drill instructor, I met a few of them. But again, you're talking a few moons back. And I don't know if some of these gentlemen are around yet anymore, or who they are for that matter. So I don't know that if I'll follow through or not. I might give them a call or see what. But that's the only one I know of that I would be involved in. They've had a few of the bomber outfits when I was at Griffiths, but they have them other places because Griffiths isn't there anymore. So it's a little too far for me to travel.
So are you in any, you mentioned the VFW.
Yes, I'm in our local VFW 8692 Colony, which is just the other side of the railroad tracks here. In fact, I was over there doing some gardening. I'm a junior vice commander, which is, they have a commander, senior vice commander, junior vice commander, and on down the line. And I've been one for about 4 years, and I'm quite involved with the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and then I'm into the TRICARE program, which is for retired personnel. It gives you a lot of your medical benefits. And I'm in the TRIA, which is the Retired Enlisted Association. So I stick with the military one way or another. I'm involved with the military in one form or another. And we have a color guard. I'm planning to go join that, be part of the color guard, because they need help in the color guard. They're in the midst of changing uniforms, so I'm waiting to see which way we're going to go on that before I get too involved with the color guard. But I enjoy doing that very much.
So what does the VFW organization do? You mentioned different offices and all. What do you do in that group?
Well, we support the local community. Little League, Pop Warner, the VA. In fact, our chaplain, Norm Jennings, is a volunteer, and his daughter works at the VA in the volunteer section, and he goes down there and administers to anybody who needs it as the chaplain. He takes book. In fact, I have 3 bags of books out there for him to take to the VA, and we, as a VFW, support them financially if they need. Well, I think they need some televisions and a few things down there, and we've bought them for them, and we've given them cash donations and anything we can to help the old vet in any way we can down there. So we are deeply involved with the VA as far as supporting them. And any other, well, we've built ramps for some of the military retirees or people who are invalids and have to have a ramp for a wheelchair, and we've built ramps for them, and done a lot of little things. Or we've had a few that are impaired visually, and we drive them to wherever they need to go. Just in general, try to be helpful. I guess that's the main word.
Now, do you find, are you getting some of the people from Desert Storm or any of those joining your group?
Very few. The trouble with the VFW is you cannot join it unless you've been to a unit in a foreign war. So it limits our personnel. As opposed to, say, like the American Legion. Now, if you've been in it for 2 days or a week, you can join the American Legion, but you can't. You've got to come out with proof that you were overseas in some sort of circumstance before you can join the VFW. That limits it. We're getting older, unfortunately. We have a lot of World War II fellas, and they're not getting any younger. And we're out avidly trying to get, in fact, our commander, Bob Ledoux, is a Vietnam vet. But we have very few. We have a few. My son, my stepson rather, is a Desert Storm veteran. He's a member. And my foster son, Joe, the one that works at the VA, is a member, because he was in Desert Storm, and so was Mike. In fact, Mike was a Marine, and he was in the oil fields. Well, you probably remember when they had that big burning situation over there. He was right in the middle of that. Joe is a medic, so he was in the other end. He was on the end where somebody got hurt. Joe was involved in that. But I mentioned our chaplain, Norm Jensen, and he is a World War II vet, but he was a bombardier, or not, I shouldn't say bombardier. Yes, he was a bombardier in the nose of a B-24, and he flew over Ploesti and some of those outfits in Germany. And Norm is very interesting to talk to, because he did get kind of banged up a little bit with shrapnel. And he said the only thing that saved him quite a bit was the seat he was sitting on was made of steel. Otherwise, he could have been hurt a little more, because he sits right up in the nose of that blister of a B-24. And so he has some interesting tales. If you approach him on it, he don't mind talking about it, but you have to start it.
One thing that's very hard for the youngsters of today to believe is the starting pay that you got when you went into basic training. People can't believe that you lived on such a small amount of money. Can you remember those
Well, I
paydays?
can't remember what my basic pay was, but I can remember that I went to the base theater and it cost me $25, and a haircut cost me $25. So, commensurate with whatever I was earning at the time, which wasn't a lot, you didn't have to spend a lot because you lived on the base, and everything on the base was, fairly reasonable. So, if you had to live outside at that time, of course, economy was a lot different back then, and prices of everything was much cheaper than it is now. But I survived one way or another. Of course, I fought, make sure I get more rank as much as I could as time went on, so get that little extra money in your back pocket.
Mm-hmm.
What was the deciding factor for you to get out at the end of 20 years?
Well, I think the deciding factor is my girls were now getting older, and traveling was becoming a problem. And while I was in recruiting in Gloversville, I had a home built in Pine Bush, which is over on Kings Road originally. And it had a small farm and everything, and the kids were getting to make good friends, old school chums, and they went to Pinewood School there on Kings Road, and they finally wound up going to Mahonison, which took in part of my old school days from the Draper High School. And so I thought, well, the better part of valor is stay put. So I decided, well, because I seriously would have went for 30. It wouldn't have fazed me at all. I would have enjoyed it. But it was getting to the point where it was becoming a problem, so I figured, well, okay, I'll retire and I'll go look for a job, and I wound up at Sears. Now I went to I don't know if people are familiar with Rotterdam. There's a place called Bigsby School. It's nothing more than a plaque now. It's at the corner of Altamont and Courier Road, but it's just a plaque, and that's where I went to grade school, in Bigsby School. It's right next to, I think it's Gabriel's grocery store now. Used to be Gershon's grocery store, and as a kid I worked there for Mr. Gershon, stacking shelves. So that's going way back now.
So you
There's a lot
sort
of changes in Rotterdam since then.
Right, so you sort of began your life in this area and have ended up back in the area
Yep,
again.
yep,
Home is
Pretty
where
much
the
so.
heart is, I guess.
yeah, yeah, that's for sure.
If you had to do it over again, would you still go into the Air Force?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't change a thing. I can't think of a thing I would change, other than maybe get more education, because I was a high school graduate, and I do have some college, but I never really forcibly pursued it, and maybe become an officer, but I don't regret it. I like being a non-com because I was right where, how can I say it, where the action was, or where whatever was happening was happening. I somehow feel that officers lose out a little bit there. They don't get the camaraderie or the closeness that you do with your other fellows, that you're dealing with all the time, day in and day out. So, no, I wouldn't change a thing. I have no regrets whatsoever. I enjoyed every second.
Now, we've heard a lot of comments from fellows who served in Vietnam that when they came home, and for a long time after that, they weren't accepted. They were chastised, not by everyone, but quite a few people. Did you experience anything like that, hostility, when you got back?
Only slightly, because I was in a peculiar situation. I lived in Bangkok, which makes most Vietnam vets laugh, because I lived in a hotel. But I flew in and out of Vietnam, and because of that, I was associated with Vietnam and involved in it, but not like some of these boys that were right up front, you know. And it almost, when I tell them I'm a Vietnam vet, I'm almost sometimes afraid to tell them exactly what I did, because they said, you are a Vietnam vet and you lived in the, you know. So when I came home, I guess dealing with where I worked at Sears, I went right immediately to work. And so I wasn't out with the public so much where somebody would say, you were a Vietnam vet? Well, to you. I didn't get that. I can't remember anybody. The only time I can say that not about Vietnam, I'm going to digress back to England. And we went to a place called Southend-on-Sea. Was the only place that when I was traveling around, I went into a pub and I was told, we don't serve Yanks here. That's the only time I ever run into anything that was a little disparaging. And that was the only, but other than that, I love the British people and got along wonderfully with them. But just only one time that I ran into a problem. And that kind of surprised me, and I said, fine. I told them what they could do with it, whatever they were doing, and I left.
Okay, well, this has been fun, and thank you for your interview.
Well, I thank you for all your work.